Adolf Hitler rose as the untouchable leader who ruled through fear and dragged the world into its bloodiest war. But the same violence he unleashed would soon return to him. Behind the parades and flags was a man about to face his downfall and the brutal end that shocked the world forever. By April 1945, Berlin was no longer the proud capital of Hitler's empire. It was a broken city. Whole districts were nothing but piles of bricks and dust. Every night, the sky glowed red from fires that never seemed to go out. Beneath this devastation, under the Reich Chancellery in the city center, was the bunker that would become Hitler's final prison. The Führer bunker was built with thick concrete walls and heavy steel doors. It had about 30 small rooms connected by narrow hallways, designed to keep out bombs and poison gas. But it was not a place of safety. It was damp, poorly ventilated, and filled with the smell of fuel and sweat. The electric lights stayed on all the time, giving no sense of night or day. For those trapped inside, it felt like being buried alive. Hitler himself was a shadow of the man who had once commanded vast armies. His body shook with tremors that he could not control. His skin had turned pale and waxy, and he stooped forward when he walked. Years of stress had broken him, but there was more than just exhaustion. His personal doctor, Theodor Morell, had kept him alive with a mix of pills, injections, and stimulants. These drugs gave him bursts of energy, but left him weaker each day. Even as his body failed him, his mind refused to face reality. Hitler swore he would never leave Berlin. To him, the idea of fleeing was worse than death. He told his aides again and again that he would rather die in the capital than run away like a coward. This decision locked him in a cage of his own making. With the Soviets closing in, there was no escape route left. The people who stayed with him in the bunker were mostly loyal staff, including secretaries, generals, and a handful of ministers who still followed him despite knowing the war was lost. They lived in cramped rooms with thin beds and stale air. Meals had become small and joyless. Water dripped through the ceilings when shells struck nearby, sometimes flooding the lower levels. There was never silence. Above their heads, Soviet shells tore through the city, and each blast made the bunker shudder as though it might crack open. The atmosphere underground was heavy with fear and denial. Hitler still spoke about armies that no longer existed, promising counterattacks that could never come. Some aides nodded silently, pretending to believe him. Others whispered in corners, already thinking about surrender. But no one dared challenge him directly. His rage could still terrify, even in his weakened state. By April 20th, he turned 56. But there was no joy left in his birthday. From the west, the Allies had smashed through Germany's defenses. American forces under General Dwight D. Eisenhower had crossed the Rhine River in March, opening the heart of Germany to invasion. British and Canadian troops followed, capturing cities that once seemed impossible to reach. The French army, once humiliated by German occupation, was now pushing eastward, reclaiming its land and taking revenge for years of suffering. In the east, the Soviets were advancing with overwhelming numbers. Marshal Zhukov's forces, along with Marshal Konev's, had already taken towns outside Berlin. By mid-April, they were less than 40 miles away, pounding the outskirts with artillery. Hitler's military machine, once considered unstoppable, no longer existed. His best generals were either dead, like Erwin Rommel, or in Allied prisons. Those who remained alive often ignored his orders because they knew they were impossible to carry out. The German Air Force, once feared across Europe, was now almost gone, shot down, destroyed on the ground, or starved of fuel. The once mighty tank divisions had been reduced to a handful of rusting machines with little gasoline left to move. The bunker itself reflected this collapse. Hitler no longer stormed through its corridors with fiery speeches. Instead, he shuffled slowly, his body bent, leaning on furniture or aids for support. His voice, once sharp and commanding, had turned weak and shaky. Sometimes he would fall silent in the middle of a sentence, staring off into nothing. Still, he refused to face reality. He barked out orders to divisions that had already been wiped out, telling commanders to launch counterattacks with soldiers who no longer existed. The truth outside was far more tragic. Germany's defenses were made up of the very young and the very old. Boys as young as 12 from the Hitler Youth were handed rifles and told to fight against Soviet tanks. Elderly men, pulled from civilian life and forced into the Volkssturm militia, stood alongside them with little training and almost no ammunition. These desperate defenders had courage, but they had no chance against battle-hardened Soviet soldiers and endless artillery. The minister responsible for weapons and industry, Albert Speer, also came to see Hitler inside the bunker. Speer had built many of Hitler's projects during the height of the Reich, but now he saw the man in front of him was not the same. Hitler's body had wasted away. His hands trembled so badly that he could barely hold the flowers given to him. For Speer, it was clear that the leader who had once commanded armies across Europe was now only a sick, broken man hiding underground. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda chief, reacted differently. Goebbels had built his life around Hitler, shaping the Nazi message and spreading it across Germany for over a decade. Even now, with Soviet troops at the doorstep, he stayed fanatically loyal. He told Hitler that Berlin would fight street by street, house by house, and that the people would never surrender. These words brought comfort to Hitler, but most others in the room knew that they were just empty promises. Berlin was already a dead city, and everyone could see it. After presenting their flowers and words, many officials began to leave the city. They wanted to get out before the Soviets closed the ring around Berlin completely. Some left by car, some by plane, and some slipped away quietly, knowing that if they stayed, they would either die or be captured. Each handshake with Hitler was not a greeting, but a farewell. On April 21st, the battle for Berlin truly began. The Red Army unleashed a storm of artillery that shook the city day and night. Thousands of guns fired without pause. The blasts tore apart apartment blocks, cracked bridges, and flattened entire streets. The earth itself trembled with each strike, and the noise was deafening. It felt like the city was being ripped to pieces. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front pushed hard from the north, while Marshal Ivan Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front closed in from the south. Together they commanded over 2.5 million soldiers. Against them stood fewer than 100,000 defenders. The Soviets advanced, block by block. Every street turned into a battlefield. Tanks rolled over the ruins, crushing cars and rubble beneath their tracks. Buildings were blown apart until they became piles of stone. Civilians hid in cellars and subway tunnels, clinging to the hope of survival. Fires spread through neighborhoods, burning everything from shops to homes. The city was sealed off completely. Trains no longer ran, and roads were blocked by enemy forces. For the people of Berlin, there was no way out. Inside the Führer bunker, Hitler received reports from the front every few hours. Each one brought worse news. Soviet troops had broken through outer defenses, crossed rivers, and were now only a few miles away from the city center. The bunker itself was no longer untouchable. Shells landed close enough to shake the walls, sending dust and small stones falling from the ceiling. People were trapped inside for days at a time, hearing the city die above them. Despite this, Hitler refused to consider surrender. His belief in loyalty and death had replaced reason. He was determined that if he fell, he would fall in Berlin. And with each passing hour, the Soviet ring around the city grew smaller and tighter. The last stage of his life had already begun with his wife. Eva Braun had always lived in the background of Hitler's world. She was not a politician, not a general, and not someone who shaped decisions. She was simply his companion, a woman who had been with him for years but kept away from the public eye. Most Germans hardly knew her name. Yet in the final days of the Third Reich, she stepped into the center of the story. She was only 33 years old, still young, and she could have escaped the crumbling city. Many urged her to leave Berlin while she still had the chance, but Eva refused. She told those around her that her place was at Hitler's side. If he stayed in Berlin to face death, then she would too. Her decision shocked some, but she never wavered. She had lived in his shadow for years, and now she was ready to share his end. Her presence inside the bunker changed the mood, even if only slightly. While generals argued about lost battles and Hitler raged about betrayal, Eva tried to create a sense of normal life. She wore her dresses as if it were a normal day, played cheerful songs on the gramophone, and even smiled to calm the secretaries. Sometimes she offered small comforts like tea or cigarettes to ease the nerves of those who were frightened. But behind her light gestures was the heavy truth. She was waiting for death, and everyone knew it. For Hitler, Eva's presence was a reminder of life outside politics and war. She represented something human in a place filled with despair. By the last week of April 1945, Hitler's world was collapsing, not only outside the bunker, but also inside it. The men who had once stood by him through victories were now thinking of only themselves. Hermann Goering, who had been one of Hitler's oldest allies and the man once seen as his possible successor, made a move that sealed his downfall. From his base in southern Germany, Goering sent a telegram saying that since Hitler was trapped in Berlin and unable to act, he should take control of the Reich. To Goering, this seemed logical. He believed the government needed leadership if Hitler could no longer provide it. But to Hitler, it was nothing short of treason. He stripped Goering of every title, branded him a traitor, and ordered his arrest. At the same time, another betrayal unfolded. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and one of Hitler's most loyal followers for more than 2 decades, tried to strike a secret deal with the Allies. He believed he could save himself by offering peace, even though Hitler had sworn never to surrender. When Hitler discovered this, he was outraged. Himmler had built his career on blind loyalty to the Führer, enforcing the most brutal orders without hesitation. For Hitler, to see Himmler desert him at the final hour was unbearable. It was not just disobedience, it was a knife in the back from the man he trusted most. These betrayals shook Hitler more than the enemy closing in on Berlin. The Soviets were already inside the city, but the collapse of loyalty within his own circle cut even deeper. He ranted and raged, but beneath the anger was the crushing reality that the empire he had built through fear and violence was now falling apart from the inside. The bunker became filled with suspicion, where every word and action was watched. Trust no longer existed. Those who remained knew that Hitler's paranoia could turn on them at any moment. It was no longer just a war against the outside world. It was a fight for survival inside those concrete walls. By April 28th, Hitler finally admitted to himself what he had refused to believe for weeks, that the war was lost, and his life was almost over. He had spent years boasting that he would never allow himself to be captured, and now he was preparing for the end. That night, he called his young secretary, Traudl Junge, and dictated his last will and political testament. In the document, he placed the blame for the war on the Jews and denounced his former generals as cowards and failures. He refused to accept responsibility for the destruction of Germany. Just hours later, in the early morning of April 29th, the bunker witnessed a strange and almost surreal event: a wedding. Hitler married Eva Braun, the woman who had been by his side for more than a decade but always kept in the background. She was rarely mentioned in public, and now in the final hours of the Third Reich, she became his wife. The ceremony was short and somber. A small group of witnesses gathered in the bunker's dimly lit room, and a simple civil official carried out the marriage. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration, only the sound of artillery pounding above. Eva signed her name as Eva Hitler, aware that it was a name she would carry for less than a day. After the ceremony, the bunker tried to pretend for a moment that life was normal. A small breakfast was served, champagne was poured, and Hitler and Eva shared a quiet toast with their closest companions. But the mood was heavy. Everyone knew the truth. It was not a wedding of joy, but of resignation. For Hitler, it was his last attempt at control, to shape his ending on his own terms. For Eva, it was a choice to follow him into the grave, rather than live without him. April 30th was the day the world had waited for years. Berlin was in ruins, and the Soviets were only a few blocks away from the Reich Chancellery. Their tanks were so close that every strike made the bunker walls shake like an earthquake. Inside, Adolf Hitler woke up early. He no longer looked like the powerful dictator he once was. His uniform jacket was faded, and his body was frail. He ate a small and simple breakfast, knowing it would be his last. That morning, Hitler gathered a few loyal people who were still with him. The bunker was tense and silent. He told his staff he would never surrender to the Soviets. He reminded them of what had happened to Mussolini just 2 days earlier, when his body was beaten and hanged in Italy. He would not let himself face that same humiliation. He thanked his staff for their loyalty. Some broke down in tears, realizing this was the end. Others stood frozen, unable to believe that the man who once ruled Europe was preparing for death. After a quiet lunch, Hitler and Eva Braun, now his wife for only a day, walked slowly into his private study. Eva carried the vial of cyanide she had chosen for herself. Outside the bunker, staff waited in silence while the sound of battle grew louder above them. Minutes passed like hours. Suddenly, a sharp gunshot cracked through the air. Everyone froze. When the door was opened, the truth was undeniable. Hitler sat slumped on the sofa with a pistol still in his hand. A wound in his temple ended his life. Eva lay beside him, lifeless from poison. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. Right after his death, Hitler's aides wrapped his body and carried it, along with Eva's, up the narrow steps of the bunker, into the ruined garden of the Reich Chancellery. Soviet artillery was still pounding the city, and explosions shook the ground as they worked. In the open air, they laid the two bodies in a shell crater. They poured cans of gasoline over them until the smell of fuel filled the garden. Then they struck a match and set the bodies on fire. The flames rose high. Loyal staff members stood guard, shielding the fire as best they could. The smell of human flesh was mixed with the smoke from Berlin's destruction. They watched until there was little left, just ashes and a few blackened bones. In haste, they pushed the remains deeper into the crater and covered them with dirt and rubble from the bombed garden. To them, it was the final act of loyalty, ensuring their leader's body would never fall into enemy hands. It was a desperate attempt to erase him from the world, that even in death, Hitler's shadow would continue to haunt history. Hours after his death, Joseph Goebbels took control as chancellor, but even he knew it would not last. On May 1st, Goebbels and his wife killed their 6 children with poison before taking their own lives. The bunker turned into a tomb for the last loyal followers of the Third Reich. On May 2nd, the remaining staff surrendered to the Soviets. Berlin was in ruins. The war in Europe ended just days later, with Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945. The Soviets recovered Hitler's remains, but the details were kept secret for years. His bones were moved several times, examined, and eventually destroyed in the 1970s to prevent any grave from becoming a shrine. The bunker in Berlin was later sealed and destroyed. Nothing remains of the place where Hitler spent his last hours, but the memory of those brutal final days remains one of the most chilling chapters in history.